the student loan stuff. So whenever you're watching this, this is the Supreme Court just heard arguments today. From what I've read so far, not looking real good. But we're going to look at the cases because the cases are kind of bogus. So we're going to have a guy explain them here. I have Sam Cedar on the majority report, and who's this guy with him?
Connected as opposed to
Sorry. And sorry about that, everybody. So who's with him? Mark Joseph Stern. And Mark Joseph Stern is he's a legal analyst, but he looked at these cases, and this is a little old, but it's basically what the cases are that just went to the Supreme Court today. So they're going to talk about this for a second, and then we're gonna go over what it is. So Mr. Stern and Mr. Cedar are going to cover this for us right now. Dump some wisdom on us, gentlemen.
Aren't with so that, like, you could argue that was the auspices in which this loan forgiveness happened under the HEROES Act.
Let me take a second to clarify that. That was my mistake. So Biden's justification was, back in 2003, they did what's called the HEROES Act. And this was during the Iraq War. And the idea was it was an emergency act where the Department of Education could put off payments for student loans and things like that, especially for soldiers, right, who are overseas, right, so they wouldn't be accruing interest and all that. So the idea behind the HEROES Act as well, we're technically in a state of national emergency where this is going to economically affect this group of people, soldiers in the case, right? So Biden's saying, well, technically with COVID, we're in an economic, disaster, a national emergency, right? So that qualifies under the HEROES Act. So the Department of Education, under the HEROES Act, should have the right to say, we're going to do this loan forgiveness, right? Because if they don't, a lot of these loans have been, postponed. When they come due, a lot of people aren't going to be able to pay them. And so you're going to see a shit ton of defaults over the next couple of years, which is going to damage the economy. If people are defaulting on their loans and you're having to go after their stuff, right? Their homes and things like that, it's going to be very devastating. So they're saying, no, it's a national emergency under the HEROES Act. We need to get these forgiveness done so these people don't get into a horrible financial situation. So that's the argument that Biden's making. He's going to give you the argument that the Republican legislatures in the states are making. Mr. Stern is here on the left.
What made this susceptible to these challenges, or was it something else?
These judges were always going to find a way, I think, to block this law. I mean, I think or this program, and you can see that because they're concocting these ridiculous theories of standing. And you laid out one, like Missouri has this student loan processor that has the name Missouri, or the word Missouri in its name. It's called like the Missouri something something. It's not a part of the state. It's not a state agency, but the state of Missouri somehow persuaded the Eighth Circuit that it is, and got this preliminary injunction against the program. And I think it's worth noting, this injunction, it was 5 pages long. The number of sentences devoted to analyzing whether this program is actually legal, 0. The Eighth Circuit devoted 0 sentences to analyzing whether student loan debt relief is lawful. Instead, it spent 5 pages explaining how this was such a big deal that it had no choice but to put it on hold indefinitely. That is not a court that will care exactly which statute the Biden administration uses to justify student loan relief. That is a Republican court that is hungry to halt this program by any means necessary, and will not even bother to justify its decisions on the basis of law because it has the power to step in and do whatever the hell it wants.
Okay, so he makes a great argument there. So, did you have a comment there? Oh, okay, so.
No.
Well, you should know a bit about this as a teacher, because I
do.
Yeah, you do. Mohella is what he's talking about, is the Missouri loan. So a lot of you guys who have student loans, it's through a company called Navient, but Navient is a private company that the government runs the loans through. However, there is a federal company that it runs loans through, and that's how it does most of its loan forgiveness for civil servants and other people. And Lacey would know.
Yeah, so we all just got gifted to Mohila.
Mm-hmm.
When you first go to start certifying your employment to get them to count it toward your forgiveness, your loans suddenly vanish away from whoever had them and get sent to somebody not of your choice. It used to be Fed Loan Servicing and Fed Loan Servicing, and they pulled out of it, and it became Mohila. So in the middle of all of this, with payment pauses and trying to hurry up and get in the applications for the temporary public student loan forgiveness program, etc., they started moving all of our loans over to Mohila.
Mm-hmm.
And ironically, civil servants don't get a choice about this. Like, if you're enrolled in the forgiveness program,
right,
you're just given to this particular company.
Right.
So they're not exactly in a bad position, are they?
No.
They get your loans whether you want them to have them or not.
Right. So here's the deal, though. So Mohila does a lot of this where they do the forgiveness on the student loan. Now, when the loans transfer over, like you're applying for forgiveness, and I don't know, Lacey's situation is probably different because she's been a public servant for a long time. But if you go back and forth for Mohila, this is really great, because if you're a private person that has to go over to Mohila from, say, Navient, like me, and I'm applying for, let's say, forgiveness for, let's say I end up working for a nonprofit for 10 years and I apply for loan forgiveness. So I have to transfer everything from Navient to Mohila. Mohila is going to charge me like 10 or 15% on the total amount of what I owe just to transfer it. Right? So for me, it's scary because if I don't get the forgiveness, now I owe all that much more money if it gets denied for whatever reason. But now under the Biden administration, a lot of those are just being granted. So you'll have people that are like, okay, I owe $27,000, right? And now I qualify for the total loan forgiveness as a public servant or a nonprofit, right? So I'm transferring my 27 over to Mohila. Well, now all of a sudden Mohila is going to charge me. So now it's 33,000 that I owe. But I'm crossing my fingers that it gets forgiven. So Mohila, when it gets forgiven, just made $6,000 for basically moving money from one account to another and then getting a check from the government to pay it off. So you got to think of it from Mohila's perspective. If they're doing this, they could make, if they're starting to do loan forgiveness, Mohila could make billions on some of these forgiveness programs. So Mohila, even though it's Missouri, Missouri Office, whatever it is, whatever the name is, it's not attached to the state of Missouri at all. And in fact, it does everything directly with the federal government. So the lawsuit in the state of Missouri is, well, no, Mohila is attached to us, so we're suing because Missouri is going to lose money. Well, Missouri is not going to lose any money, right? Because Mohila is not attached to them. And Mohila isn't suing at all. They're not even at the Supreme Court. They have no representation because they're not a part of this at all. As a separate entity. So there isn't any real standing here, but it doesn't really seem to matter if the Republican judges or the conservative judges just want to say, well, but does Biden really have the right? We're going to skip the fact that you don't even have a right to be here to testify in this case. We're just going to skip to the fucking point. And that was his whole thing, is if they just want to dump it, they're just going to dump it. Not because they have a good reason. Now, here's the second big one that we'll go through real quick that he's talking about. And this one I think is from Texas. So he's going to go through this real quick.
In Texas, the judge used the major questions doctrine, which you've talked about on this program. It is a made-up whole cloth in only existence in the past 9 years, and there's no definition of what constitutes major in the major questions doctrine. It really just seems to be like when we think something's like important, then it is.
This is going right back to law versus policy. The major questions doctrine is a policy veto over laws that conservative judges don't like. They don't like the Clean Air Act. Major questions doctrine, shoot it down. They don't like student debt relief. Major questions doctrine, shoot it down. Elena Kagan called it a get out of text free card, and I think that's exactly right. I don't really understand how any one person can decide what is major or not. I had thought that the court simply had to say whether Congress passed this law and allowed this regulation or not. But we're in this new era thanks to the Supreme Court's decision over the summer in West Virginia versus EPA that gives these conservative judges a new tool to just do whatever the hell they want. And that
Okay, so let's I don't want to get too in depth with that. So the major questions doctrine is this. So the Texas thing, it's two guys in Texas, right? Basically suing because they're just suing under the Republicans, but they're suing saying, well, I don't want the student loans, or I think it's unfair, right? But both of these guys, it's hard to say that because you have to show injury in a lawsuit. You have to show loss of some type. The problem is if they win, they won't get the student debt, so they'll lose money. If they lose, they'll get the student debt, and they'll get. So it's kind of. So basically, they're not showing loss. They're showing, I just don't want this gain. That's basically their lawsuit. It's insane. And so what happened in Texas was the court just said, well, we're going to use this thing called the major questions doctrine. All right. It's not a law. There's nothing legal about it. What it's basically saying is the judge is saying, well, it's above my head, so I'm going to kick it up to the next court. Right? I, as a circuit court judge in Texas, cannot be asked to adjudicate as a judge. How am I capable to judge such matters? This needs to go up to the Supreme Court. That's basically what it is. And he's right. It's a get out of jail free card. It's a get out of doing your job. Right? Man.
You just can't make this stuff up, can you?
No. So it's all kind of horseshit. So everybody knows that going into the Supreme Court. So the argument right now, the question right now is this: John Roberts will probably go with it because he's a very corporatist kind of guy, right? However, the question is, does Brett Kavanaugh and Comey Barrett go with this? Because there really isn't any standing to start with. And they're already in, their whole reputations are in the total trash, and their humiliations with their friends because of the whole Roe v. Wade thing. So the question is do they step up and say something? Because Scalia is going to say yes, and Thomas is going to say yes, and Gorsuch is going to say, yeah, let's dump this whole thing. The question is what are Barrett and Kavanaugh going to do? So I think that's what really it's going to come down to. But the standing issue, there really isn't much to go with. But if they want to just skip past it, they can. So we'll see. I mean, I wouldn't get your hopes up, boys and girls, but it's all kind of a quagmire of horseshit right now. I mean,
it's kind of a shit show over there. Kind of a shit show.
Well, hey, go ahead.
I know this is mixing news stories, but if the red states seceded, we could just give them the Supreme Court and we could just start a new one.
Well, it'd be interesting because the Mohela case is the 8th Supreme Court, and they are extremely conservative. I think you're in the 3rd? I don't know, the 2nd or the 3rd district or circuit. Yeah, I'm in the 9th circuit, and so the 9th circuit is a little bit more reasonable for the most part. I mean, it's the nice thing about living on the West Coast is it's kind of like I know what's going to happen. There's not a whole lot of mystery. Something goes to the 9th circuit, everybody's like, yeah, we kind of already know what they're gonna It's not going to be a toss-up, right? But when you have such a political divide, it's like that's the problem. The Supreme Court lost. I mean, it's always been sort of a political tool, but it's lost all legitimacy. If they were just about the law, they'd just be adjudicating the law, but they're not anymore. I mean, and I think Dobbs, where they basically threw out Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade wasn't even argued in Dobbs. It wasn't even brought up. They just added that to the decision. And then they leaked the decision prior to the final decision, basically to rein in Kavanaugh. I mean, so the whole thing was corrupt. And now how many hundreds of thousands of women are suffering because they can't get medical care for their pregnancies. So, I mean, I don't know. It basically just nail in the coffin for the Supreme Court for me. They could go either way.
And are they naive enough to really think the whole back alley abortion thing isn't going to make a huge comeback and women aren't just going to start dying again? I mean,
well,
that was what was happening before.
Well, there is some of that. Mostly the big problem they're going to have is for the anti-abortion people, the anti-choice people, it's going to be there are so many drugs that are abortifacients that are so much better now than when Roe v. Wade was passed, in the 60s, 70s?
Right.
How are you going to stop that? Women are going to be able to get pills over, from anywhere. I mean, you guys couldn't, the drug war, you guys couldn't stop coke. You're going to stop fucking, So anyway, side note on abortion, not a financial thing. We could do a financial thing on abortion and just what it costs to have a children and all that.